Hi, everybody. My name is Boro Milivojevic, and I'm head of Devoteam AWS business for the DACH region. Today, we will talk about the microservices and how your company can save a significant part of its IT budget implementing this strategy. At the beginning of this presentation, I would like to emphasize that this is not a highly technical presentation, but rather one which will, in a compact 20 minutes time, show how microservices can help in long-term savings and better performance of companies. It is not my intention to go really deep into the microservices architecture, but rather to show a picture from 1,000 feet or 10,000 feet and wake up your curiosity. This presentation is mainly targeting managers and CXO level audience, while more elaborate and technical presentations you can find throughout the day presented by my solution architect colleagues from Devoteam and AWS. Let's see what we have on the agenda today. We will shortly touch into the microservices and what microservices are. Then we will talk about 5 long-term cost benefits for your company. And after that, we will talk about 5 important cost considerations when you are starting your journey with the microservices or you opted to implement microservices on a couple of projects in your company. And at the end, maybe you're considering adopting microservices. I'll talk a little bit about how Devoteam can help. Let's see what are microservices. Microservices is actually a manner of structuring an application such that the business capabilities to be provided in an application can be segregated, built, and deployed as an independent service. Rather than developing the application as a whole, it is called a monolithic application architecture. You have it on the left side of the slide. The entire business functionality in the application is split up into unique processes on the right side. Each process is designed and developed as an independent service containing its own business logic and having its own set of databases. The microservices architecture helps to reduce development complexity, which is very important for the long-term bigger projects and very important for savings at the end of the day. Large or complex applications can actually be broken down into simpler, easy developable, and maintainable services that can be upgraded as and when business dynamics change and work processes have to be remodeled to reflect real life working. Here on a slide, you can see how the monolithic architecture is actually built around a server. And then if we want to scale, we need to multiply servers and scale work, which is, of course, a very costly and sometimes very error-prone activity. On the other side, microservices, we develop them, and then basically as many as we need, we can distribute across the cloud computing environment. Now the question is, when should we use microservices? Businesses today have to compete aggressively in the market to retain their competitive edge. So consumers' requirements evolve at a rapid pace, and businesses have to improve the scope and quality of their products and on a continuous basis to actually keep those customers base and generate, at the end of the day, profits for the company. Productivity levels can be increased by improving in-house processes. Therefore, businesses have to focus upon streamlining their workflows and adopting new processes and methods to stimulate return of investment. To do this, organizations require process automation that can be easily developed, maintained, deployed, and if needed, scaled when the needs and the company grows. The goal of the automation in-house in the shortest time. The goal is to automate in-house processes in the shortest time possible. Many times it can be difficult to identify and freeze business requirements in large organizations, since numerous processes have to be identified and their scope determined before the automation process can begin. Here on the slide, we can actually see the three major use cases where microservices implementation is recommended. As a number one, we are talking about the outdated systems. At some time, significant amounts of time can be saved, and it can be a lot easier to develop new systems rather than updating existing ones. Time and delivery are two important factors affecting return of investment, and businesses might find it most cost-worthy to develop new system instead of maintaining complex system, which are difficult to update, test, and debug. Of course, that this process of developing new needs to be in parallel, and it incurs some costs. But at the end of the day, long term, the costs are going to be sinking and going to be lower if there is a microservices architecture in place. The second scenario or setup when we need to use microservices is when the system or systems are too big. And when I say big, this does not relate to the size of the application, so the monolithic application, but rather to the scaling capability of business requirements. For example, large organizations have typically varied processes and requirements. They need to be automated and remodeled as the scope changes, scope of business, scope of customer needs, etc. Monolithic architectures, typically following so-called waterfall development process, takes time to build, change, and deploy. By using microservices, a particular service can be redesigned and deployed within a short time without affecting the scope of other processes of services. New services can be built within short duration and deployed independently, so the parallel work of different teams can continue without influencing the monolithic applications around. And the third one, a little bit more advanced, is when the whole architecture, software architecture or IT architecture of the company is goal-oriented. Monolithic architectures are usually homogeneous systems, employing the same technology to develop business functionality. The company chooses Java and develops everything using Java or .NET or some other technology and programming language. This can reduce actually the business scope, as all technologies have their pros and cons. This limitation is reduced with microservices, as different technologies can be used to develop individual processes and services best suited to deliver the business functionality required for that particular process. For example, if we are building an IoT or artificial intelligence piece of our business and we opt for using one technology, it will not collide with using Java as a standard IT stack for the rest of the applications. The goal specific for each process can be easily attained using microservices development process. All right, let's see what are the 5 long-term cost benefits of microservices. The first one would be distributed, autonomous, remote, and cross-functional teams. We already talked about that. Microservices are a great blessing or a great thing for distributed or remote teams. It can be super complicated to develop a massive monolithic application if you're working across the globe, across different teams, because they all need to be in sync. In microservices architecture, developers actually get more independence and work autonomously on a piece of functionality and their own microservices application. These teams can take decisions quickly. So if you are developing a large-scale solution, let's be sure that you are considering the microservices architecture. Number two, simultaneous development and testing with improved speed. Very similar to number one, as different teams of developers can work on different components simultaneously, and you don't have to wait for others to finish developing a particular piece of code functionality. The microservices architecture can actually tackle productivity and development speed issues in a much effective manner. It is also convenient to speed up the quality assurance, as each microservice can be actually developed but also tested independently, even while other teams are working on their models and even when the whole system is in production. Number three, develop business functionality instead of lengthy code, instead of huge spaghetti code. Microservices facilitate the creation of products rather than projects, rather than something which is project based. So you're focusing on a product. Teams can focus more on developing business functionality instead of creating huge amount of code logic and writing lengthy lines of code to explain that. The programmers can be more creative and center their work around business capabilities rather than focusing on technologies. Microservices can be used in multiple contexts. The same microservice can be, for instance, reused many times in some business processes or over different business applications and business setups. Each team member is responsible for a particular service, which results in creating a productive cross-functional teams where each of the team members or each of the teams know exactly the technology in which they work and can actually be super productive in that piece of technology. So far, so good. Number four, easier to code, deploy, rebuild, and manage microservices. Microservices development focuses upon simple setups. Applications are super easy to create and maintain. When we are actually splitting them into the smaller, easily developable functionality pieces, applications, or modules. It's easier to code, it's easier to rebuild, it's easier to deploy and redeploy and manage at the end of the day the microservices. Each microservice can be designed using different programming languages, databases, and software environments. If a particular microservice uses too much, for instance, memory or disk, or overloads the processor, it will only affect the functionality of that particular service. Each service can be deployed independently. For example, AWS Lambda, offered by AWS Microservices architecture, let us run our code without provisioning or managing the servers, which is for programmers absolutely fantastic because they want to actually focus on coding and on solving the problems, business problems, not on managing some servers. After uploading our code, Lambda is actually through the AWS cloud Lambda manages everything required to run and scale that code. And number five, last but not least, flexibility in tech stacks and programming languages help scalability. Why? Because each microservice can be developed using a different technology. This simplifies the process of selecting the most appropriate tech stacks and fulfill specific needs of each business component. Decoupled services written in different languages, programming languages, and programming platforms can actually coexist. This is very good for scaling your solution in the future. With microservices, one can actually quickly add new components into already existing architecture and scale a business process. For example, again, AWS Lambda, offered by AWS Microservices, provides serverless computing capabilities, which reduces the hassle of managing servers, meaning much faster and much more reliable scalability. All right, so definitely a couple of use cases of a long-term cost benefit of microservices. Not an easy task, but if you engage it, the company at the end of the day profits. So, how about starting the microservices journey, and what kind of cost considerations should we look at when adopting microservices as an architecture? We actually have five costs which are incurred on our journey towards the microservices. We have the costs for getting started, we have the costs for getting the speed, then getting the quality. Of course, always we have the costs of maintaining the solution. And at the end of the day, we ask ourselves, what is the total cost of ownership? Let's start from number one, get started. Here, the key is that not all developers will be actually familiar with the microservices architecture. Depending on where you and your company are starting from, the so-called getting started costs might be actually a budget concern. And this is reasonable to think about, and it's absolutely there in place. But actually, a long-term look and view on it is that the investment is actually in the starting costs is negligible when compared to the downstream benefits, which will be significant. Think about all those programmers and all those bugs and all those processes which can be automated and actually partitioned into small chunks of programmers, which can then in parallel build your solutions. Adopting a microservices architecture quickly defray those costs by returning large amounts of business and technical value. So yes, costs at the beginning, but the long-term view is that this investment is actually negligible when compared to all the downstream benefits. What about the speed? The so-called dependencies inherited in any monolithic application or system will actually inhibit innovation. Application monoliths actually don't tend to play well with, let's say, new development techniques or new programming languages, such as agile development, DevOps, or some modern programming language. These, all of the new ones, they emphasize speed. Any update that's made to one part of the application in a monolithic system affects other parts. So any update will need to be tested thoroughly. Again, time. Time is money. Microservices help developers increase the speed of their development without sacrificing quality. This results in a competitive advantage. They will be able to refine their applications faster than those who haven't yet adopted the microservices strategy. I'm actually reading here a long-term strategy of how to be faster. And when you are faster, you are easier adapting. And when you're easier adapting and easier changing, then your marketplace is secured. Number three, get quality. So the speed is there. We started. What about the quality? The DevOps, the agile software development, and other modern development practices rely heavily on automated testing. The idea is to give developers or quality assurance people the ability to set up several test environments in just a few clicks and let an automated testing program handle most of the effort. DevOps practices expect to rebuild and test quickly without hassle. Why is that possible in the microservices world? Where because the applications or microservices or micro applications are small and it's easy to test them thoroughly. And it's easy also to automate the testing process. Microservices make for a much cleaner testing process. They're built simple, so it's easier to rewrite their code. As a result, it's also simple to perform unit tests. By definition, microservices are simple, quick, and easy to write. Therefore, they are easy to test. Okay, when we have started, when we got the speed, when we got the quality, so how about maintaining? Let's assume that you're running application monolith. Maintaining this application takes time because there are a lot of dependencies. If the system is big, the bigger system, the more dependencies. This The time it takes to test and update application monitoring means that maintenance has already become a huge part of the traditional IT budget. This is an interesting information. A simple healthcare IT budget for Gartner shows that 70% of budget expenditures came from simply running the business, and actually leaves very little for the future development, new development, and innovation. As for adopting microservices, the first part of value generation comes in form of maintenance advantages. A microservices architecture with fewer application dependencies and simple, smaller applications and APIs will reduce the time on application maintenance. Saving on application maintenance have proven to be more enough to cover the number one, getting started costs within a year or a couple of years. The total cost of ownership, if you use software that creates microservices directly from the legacy or on-premise systems, you can actually bypass the complex enterprise service bus or service-oriented architectures that were layers that were previously used for legacy integrations. Depending on your architectural strategy, if you're focusing on a few microservices or actually have an entire microservices ecosystem, your savings can be actually quite significant, easily for bigger, larger operations in the millions of euros. All right, so if we look at all this together, so how about considering adopting microservices? We in DevOps say that we as your partner can work with you on compelling business use cases where a microservice architecture can bring immediate value. So we don't go for a long thing. We try to do together with you the so-called low-risk POC that will give you and your company the ability to envision actually what is possible. We will build the data points and we will assess the potential and the total cost of ownership necessary to begin your digital microservices journey. It's always starting at the beginning. It's always starting with talking to you about where you are at the moment and where you want to be in a few years' time if you want to simplify your system, monolithic system with the microservices.